Welcome to A Conversation with History. I'm Harry Kreisler of the Institute of International Studies. Our guest today is Elizabeth Warren, who is the Leo Gottlieb Professor of Law at Harvard University and the 2007 Jefferson Lecturer on the Berkeley campus. In addition to her legal publications, she has written 2 books, The Two-Income Trap and All Your Worth, both co-authored by Amelia Warren Tyagi, and I will show one of those books now. Professor Warren, welcome to Berkeley.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Where were you born and raised?
Born and raised in Oklahoma.
And looking back, how do you think your parents shaped your thinking about the world?
Well, my parents were from Depression era, Dust Bowl, Oklahoma. And that shapes your life growing up. I was the last of 4 children. I have 3 much older brothers. And by the time I came along, I was really kind of the second family for them. They hadn't recovered from the Depression, and I guess in many ways they never did. They talked about it. Those were the stories that permeated my childhood. What it was like to have 7 years of drought, what it was like when nobody had any money, what it was like when all your neighbors left to go to California or someplace where they thought there might be jobs. My parents hung on. They stayed. My father worked a series of different jobs. He was a maintenance man in an apartment house, was his last job. And, but they always saw themselves as middle-class people. They saw themselves as people who, for them the distinction was they used good English. And they didn't say ain't. And those were important indicia of middle-classness to my folks. And they believed in education and were very proud of this little daughter they had.
And around the dinner table, was there discussion of politics, of law, or did that all come to you later?
Oh, no. Not around the dinner table. Mostly around the dinner table, it was discussion of cars and rodeos and dogs and cows and horses and a little discussion of worry about others in the family. There was always a big sense in my family of we all kind of tried to look out for each other, but there was nobody in the family who really had much of anything.
A theme that you pursue in these books that we're going to talk about is what's happening to the family. And from what you're saying now, I get the sense that the family was very important as a last resort for survival in the context of these very harsh times.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That people who didn't have family or people who broke from their family, they were the true poor. They were the ones with nothing. But so long as you had family, you had people who would make sure that you got fed one way or another. You know, family was about canning peaches, and canning peaches was about making sure that there'd at least be something come next November when it was cold outside and there were no crops coming in. Family is the heart of what it's about.
Did you have any teachers as a young person before you went off to college who sort of shaped your thinking also about the kind of career you might take? Well,
I had wonderful teachers. I'm of that generation where there were only 2 things that a woman could do if she wanted to do something other than stay home, and that was she could become a nurse or she could become a teacher. And so there were some awfully able women who taught me from grade school on. And what they opened me up to was the possibility that I too could be a teacher. And frankly, that's when I went off to college. The whole idea was so that I could be a teacher. That's what I wanted to do. I just didn't quite know what kind of teacher I ended up becoming. So,
and at college, what did you major in, and what were the focus of your interest?
I came to college thinking I came to college on a debate scholarship. I was 16 years old when I graduated from high school, and I got a full scholarship in debate that was room, board, tuition, books, and a little spending money. It was a fabulous scholarship at George Washington University if I would debate for them. It was sort of the equivalent of an athletic scholarship, only this was one that actually a girl could get. And even though there weren't very many girls in debate either, I was going to be a teacher, and I quickly switched over and decided what I wanted to do was work with brain-injured children. So I got my degree in speech pathology and audiology, which meant that I would be able to work with children who had head trauma and other kinds of brain injuries. And that's what I did.
For a while. I mean, you actually pursued that career.
I actually did. I was married at 19 and then graduated from college, actually, after I'd married. And my first year post graduation, I worked, it was in a public school system, but I worked with the children with disabilities. And I did that for a year. And then that summer, I actually didn't have the education courses, so I was on an emergency certificate, it was called. And I went back to graduate school and took a couple of courses in education and said, I don't think this is going to work out for me. And I was pregnant with my first baby. So I had a baby and stayed home for a couple of years. And I was really casting about, thinking, what am I going to do? And my husband's view of it was, stay home. You know, we have children, we'll have more children, you'll love this. And I was very restless about it. And so I went back home to Oklahoma. By this point, we were living in New Jersey because of his job. I went back home to Oklahoma for Christmas and saw a bunch of the boys that I'd been in high school debate with. And they'd all gone on to law school. And they said, you should go to law school. You'll love it. And I said, you really think so? And they said, of all of us who should have gone to law school, you're the one who should have gone to law school. So I took the tests, applied to law school, and the day my daughter, who later became my co-author, turned 2 on her 2nd birthday, I started law school at Rutgers Law School in New Jersey, which at the time had the nickname of being the People's Electric Law Company.
I see.
Really
all the lawyers
crazy
for the, yeah.
That's right. These were the kind of wild and crazy lawyers. Arthur Kanoy, who was just a wonderful figure and had been very active in the civil rights movement. It's a very small law school. And I'd never met a lawyer. I mean, I didn't travel in those circles. And I took to law school like a pig takes to mud. I mean, this was fabulous. I loved law school. And then my final year in law school, I got pregnant again, and I didn't take a job. Alex was born about 3 weeks after I graduated, and it was the hardest moment in my life because I thought this world that had opened up to me, this world of ideas, and law was a tool, you could make things happen with it. I thought, because I didn't take a job right out of law school, it was all over. I just kissed it all goodbye. I'd stepped off the train and would never have a chance to get back on it. So I took the bar, hung out a shingle in northern New Jersey, did real estate closings and little incorporations and lawsuits, all on the civil side, and raised my 2 babies. And then Rutgers called and said, somebody didn't show up to teach a class. Would you like to come and teach it and start Thursday? And I said, yeah. How hard could it be, right? And so I started teaching, and then my husband got transferred to Houston, and I got my first full-time tenure-track teaching job, teaching at the University of Houston. We ended up divorcing, and then I went to the University of Texas. I remarried, went to the University of Michigan, went to the University of Pennsylvania, went to Harvard.
And now at Harvard.
And now I'm at Harvard. Isn't that an amazing story?
It is, and one of the things that I hear here is this is at a kind of a turning point in women seeing a different role for themselves. I'm curious, what do you see in addition to the opportunity that was suddenly presented in your background that made you able to seize these opportunities?
You know, partly my mother always just said that I was just contrary, that some kids are just born that way, that she, families tell stories, and those stories are, I think, both reflect what the children are and then they shape what the children are. And the story that was always told when I was very little is that my mother, when I was about 2.5, I would be allowed to play in the front yard, but she would tell me, don't go into the street. And I would look at her and wait until she turned her back and step right in the street. And I would just stand in the street, just a little bit, just on the curb, but I would stand in the street. And my mother was big on switches. She'd pull a switch off a tree and just switch the backs of my legs. And I'd cry, and she'd tell me not to go in the street. And I'd cry, and I'd step right back in the street. And finally, my mother said, she realized I was going to go in the street. So she said, okay, so here are the rules for going in the street. You look this way, you look that way. But here's how you safely go in the street. Maybe you go on the other side. You never want to stand in the street. Gave me all the rules for the street. And I was perfectly happy. And I think partly it was that I always had my neck bowed. I was always going to do something else. When we were able to pick an elective and all the girls picked drama, I, of course, had to pick debate. When all the girls dropped out of doing something, I said I was going to take physics, just because. So there was a little bit of the just because. And it was a moment. It was a moment when Gloria Steinem was out there talking. Did I think I was going to be one of those women's libbers? Heavens, no. Yeah. I wanted children. I wanted a family. And I somehow thought those were either-or choices. And yet, I wanted to do things. And so I just got lucky.
Adventuresome. And courageous. Sounds
I don't know. I never thought of it that way. I just thought of it as, I once was at a friend's house and I saw that they had wallpaper in their bathroom, and I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. So I came home and I went to Sears, and I saw this brochure on how you could do wallpaper, and I took my babysitting money and I bought enough wallpaper to wallpaper our bathroom, and I announced at the dinner table 2 weeks later when it came in, I said, I've bought wallpaper so we can wallpaper the bathroom. And my daddy said, nobody knows in our family, because it was always a family thing, nobody in our family knows how to wallpaper. He said, what are you doing? And I said, how hard could it be? People dumber than us do it every day. So it's always been a kind of a, you get out there and try it. The worst that happens is you make a mess out of it and have to throw it away. So
try it.
Yeah.
So what does it take to be a lawyer? What are the skills? What is the temperament?
Law is so multifaceted. It's almost like saying, what does it take to be a college graduate? Law is an advanced degree in thinking. And the practice of law can mean so many different things. There are lawyers who are transactional lawyers. They put deals together. They're energetic. They're creative. That's how they use what they've got. There are lawyers who are trial lawyers. They're argumentative and aggressive and quick, and that's how they use their talents and energies. There are lawyers who are those detail-oriented. Watch every last comma, every last period, and see how something fits into this slot and not that slot. There are lawyers who are just good counselors to other people. They understand law, but they have that human part that lets them talk. There are lawyers who see the big policy, and they want to think about how the laws should be changed, or how rules should be changed, and law's the tool that lets them look in those directions. So there's not only not one answer to that. I don't even think there are 10. Laws for people who want to make changes at little tiny levels or great big levels, and they're willing to use words and ideas to make those things happen.
And you started in commercial law, really. That was what your scholarship was in. But then you moved to the public realm, so help us understand how that transition came about. Was it the limits of what the law could achieve that you came to see, and your concern about public issues? What?
Well, I was doing my research, happily doing my research, and you know, the nice thing about being a professor is you get to work on whatever issue you want to work on, however you want to do it. And so I did my very first empirical study looking at the families who were going into bankruptcy, and I teamed up with a sociologist who was a good test design person who taught me an enormous amount, Dr. Terry Sullivan, who's now the provost at the University of Michigan, and we were just baby law professors, and Jay Westbrook, another law professor at the University of Texas. And we put together an empirical study of the families who were going bankrupt. This is back in the early 80s. And I'll tell you what I set out to prove. I set out to prove they were all a bunch of cheaters. My take on this, my thrust, what I was going to do is I was going to expose these people who were taking advantage of the rest of us by hauling off to bankruptcy and discharging debts that they really could repay, or who'd been irresponsible in running up debts. And I did the research, and the data just took me to a totally different place. These were hardworking, middle-class families who, by and large, had lost jobs, gotten sick, had family breakups, and that's what was driving them over the edge financially. Most of them were in complete economic collapse when they filed for bankruptcy. There was no option to bankruptcy except to just stay deep in debt for the rest of your life. They would never pay these debts off. And so it changed my vision, but it certainly didn't make me want to talk about it in any public sense. I wrote those academic articles, academic books, full of footnotes. That's what it was about. And then in 1994, Congress passed a law saying they were going to have a commission on bankruptcy and political appointees. And Mike Sinar, congressman from Oklahoma, had just been voted out of office, and President Clinton made him the head of the commission. And Mike came to me and said, I want you to be the one who comes up with the ideas and, you know, guides us. These are not bankruptcy specialists, guides us through it, helps us with the research. I said, no, not a chance. That's political. I want to be pure. I want to be pristine. I don't want to muddy what I do with political implications. I'm going to sit here, I'm going to do my research, I'll turn out the numbers, and what you do with them is your business.
And that's the academic lawyer saying that,
That's right. That was the academic lawyer saying, and you go do what you want to do with it. And Mike said, come and do this so that we have good ideas to work with, and here's what I promise you. I promise I will totally insulate you from the political part. You will never be called on to talk to a reporter. You'll never be called on to get into a political fight, to make the compromise, to make those decisions. Just feed me the good ideas, feed me the good data. I want 3 good ideas from you, and I'll take them out and sell them in Congress and sell them to my commission. And I said yes, finally. It was a hard decision for me, because I really felt like I'm jumping into a different pool. I'm losing this protection of the ivory tower. And so I said yes, that I would do it, but only on the promise that he would keep me insulated. And then he got brain cancer. And he died in the space of months, just as we're getting started with this commission. And there were other people in the commission who were perfectly willing to take it over, and who, frankly, in my view, just had a totally wrong-headed view about the families who were in bankruptcy and the changes that needed to be made. And I just looked around and said, look, either I step up or nobody does. These people are going to entirely run this commission and use this commission for what I thought were very harmful ways. And that's when I waded into the thick of it and started taking much of my research and translating it much more into public policy. Here's what we need, here's why we need it, here's how it connects up with the policy decisions that we have to make.
Now, if you had stayed with just this academic lawyer hat on, and these circumstances hadn't unfolded as they did, what route would your work, whether on the commission or not, would it have been, well, changing the wording in these laws, or what? Where does the law take you?
You know, that's the amazing part. The work would have been so sterile by comparison with what it turned out to be. Oh yeah, I'd have had great ideas for how 11 U.S.C. 1326 B2II should be modified in order to achieve a more harmonious result. But oddly enough, it was wading into the politics and beginning to understand the rest of this world. That is what shapes law. It's a law and society point. And it began, the political part ultimately enriched my understanding of the scope of the problems. It took me far beyond bankruptcy and much more into questions about what's happening to the middle class. It was often in trying to explain to other people the narrow part, that it was other people who would ask me the bigger question. So why are families in so much debt? So who are these people who are filing for bankruptcy? Or sometimes it would simply be their allegations of fact. Well, we know it's just, you know, the poor and the profligate that would cause me to say, I want to go back and study this some more. And so it enriched and in many ways transformed the work that interested me as a scholar. So I was a scholar, but I moved from kind of a one-dimensional scholar into a two-dimensional scholar.
Before we talk about this problem of the middle class, which is the subject of your lecture, I want to explore some of these elements of the political. We've gotten you into the political realm. One thing that you mention in your book, and actually you just said that your attitude about these people who had gone bankrupt was that it was their fault, that they had failed, that they had been spenders, that they had been whatever negative values we can associate. Now, that serves a political purpose, to believe that, even if it's correct. Did you begin to put those two things together?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's how it began to work. I began to see that there were a lot of people who really just didn't care, one way or the other, who the people were who were in bankruptcy. They'd taken a lot of money from the banks, and the banks had said, the credit card companies had said, this is the piece of legislation we want, we find it helpful. Well, in a democratically elected Congress, how on earth are you going to pass legislation to benefit 24 already powerful multi-billion-dollar corporations at the expense of all the people who are your constituents? Because this is a straight wealth transfer. Is it going to go to the credit card companies, or is the money going to stay with these 1.5 million little families that are filing for bankruptcy every year? And so they would just make these assertions about who these people were. And at first, I believed these were assertions made out of ignorance, because frankly, I'd made the same assertions 10 years earlier, before I'd studied, before I'd worked on this. And so I'd come in with the data and say, well, actually, let me show you how this works. And here's a random sample of 1,250 families, and here's how they were chosen, and here's what we know about them, and look at what happened to them. And people just didn't want to hear it. And finally, it was senators themselves who said, Professor, you don't understand. So-and-so over here has taken $300,000 from credit card companies and financial services industry over the last so many years. This is something that industry wants. They hire lobbyists. I see 2 lobbyists a day in here from the financial services industry to make this happen. And so the reality of these families' lives had to be reshaped to tell a politically acceptable story. We need to pass this piece of legislation. All the arrows run the wrong way, right? It's that the credit card companies wanted a piece of legislation to cut their losses and boost their profits. And so the story had to be told that this is the fault of these families who are in financial trouble. And, you know, I wish that story were true. But the data are not just close on this question. The data are just overwhelming on this question, that is just simply not the truth. And so I think it's part of a whole larger story of we don't have to provide health insurance for folks because decent people, people who worked hard and got an education and therefore got good jobs, already have health insurance. And there's just an undertone of those who don't have it probably either made the choice not to spend the money on it or have made other bad life choices that cause them to be in a place where they don't get it. And you know, if that means they don't get much health service or they lose their homes if they get sick, it's all their choices. It's all on them. I sure don't need to tax myself to build a social safety net for things that may go wrong to any of us, because it didn't happen to me. It's their fault. We all have a lot of control over this.
Now, the narratives and which narrative dominates, which is what you're talking about here. There's some irony here because, especially the conservative forces in this country, talk about values. They talk about preserving the family. They talk about all sorts of things that would suggest that they would want a narrative like the one that you're telling. But the end result is that the lobbyists and the financing of campaigns, I guess, lead the politicians to embrace a narrative that is inconsistent with the data. And then pass laws, and let's point this out, the laws would then change the rules about the interest rates that could be charged on credit cards. So it's little pieces of detail.
That's right. Very technical, very hard for the popular press to write about. The changes to the bankruptcy bill, to take that example, but there have been other changes. The bill was 1,100 pages long of impenetrable text. And it was deliberately written in a way that if you weren't a specialist, look, I'm a professor of law at Harvard. I've taught this stuff now for more than 20 years. I couldn't read the thing. I had to keep one finger in the statute and one finger on the amendment. And the bill ultimately passed in 2005. I wrote, readjusted my casebook, so I've written a book about the changes. And to this day, I'm still finding surprises in it. Someone will call me about something and I'll pull the provision out and I'll look at it and I'll say, oh my gosh, when did that one slip in? This is a case in which literally the lobbyists wrote the bill. I'm not being metaphoric here. They in fact have bragged about it in American Bankers Association newsletter. The lobbyists wrote the bill. The credit industry paid for it. The campaign contributions then paved the highway for the bill to get passed. And ordinary families just lost out.
Let me show your book again, The Two-Income Trap. And in this book, there are a couple of pages on a meeting you had with Hillary Clinton and her position on some of these issues and how it evolved. Tell our audience a little about that, because what is quite compelling about the story is that as smart as Mrs. Clinton is, and as a person with the right values, that over time as her constituency changed,
Now, don't
she
give
changed.
the story away. That's
Yes,
right.
yes.
So the story is that when the bankruptcy bill is first being proposed, this commission, I said, President Clinton appoints some folks, the commission gets started. And in 1997, commission delivers its report and says, basically, we need some changes to the bankruptcy laws, but frankly, they were a little more pro-consumer. We need some pro-consumer changes here, and a few. Let's close up a couple of loopholes. Credit industry said, no, no, no. Credit industry says, we want to make it a lot tougher for families to go bankrupt. Quite frankly, bluntly, the Clinton administration was quietly supporting them. Remember that whole notion of the new Democrats, business can count on us, the banks can come to us and we want to be their friends. And the idea was, a bankruptcy bill, it's a bunch of technical changes, who gets hurt, a bunch of people who nobody pays any attention to. And so we'll show that we can play ball. It'll go below the radar screen. Nobody will ever learn about it. So I wrote an op-ed that ended up in the New York Times about how the bill was going to disproportionately affect women, and particularly single mothers with children. And Mrs. Clinton picked up the op-ed, and I got a call about a week or two after the op-ed ran. And they said, Mrs. Clinton was going to be in town giving a speech, and would I be willing to meet with her? I said, you bet. And I said, what does she want to meet about? And they said, she would like you to talk to her more about bankruptcy. Would you come and be prepared to do that? So I show up. We meet in this tiny little room in the back behind the stage on the hotel after she's given her speech. And I'm armed. I've got my little graphs and charts and my whole deal.
And all those debating skills.
And all those debating skills. And I tell you, she is probably the quickest person I ever have spoken with in my life about this. Boy, I'd put it down, and she'd ask questions, she'd ask smart questions. She didn't know it, but she got it fast, to the point that I'd be ready to flip the next one, and she'd anticipate. She'd say, so that means what's going to happen on this next one. I said, that's exactly right. She got it. So we stand up at the end of this meeting, and she's being whisked off to the airport to go back to Washington, and she said, we must stop this terrible bill. And we stand there, we get our pictures taken together, and I think, this is great. So I later hear, she goes back to Washington, I later heard from somebody who worked in the White House, they described it as there were skid marks in the hallway from people changing their position on this bill when Mrs. Clinton got back. People who'd been pushing, yeah, we're going to support this bill. No, terrible bill, terrible bill. And to Mrs. Clinton's credit, when the bill passed the House and the Senate in 2000, one of President Clinton's last acts as President of the United States was vetoing that bill. So she, I believe, single-handedly kept it from becoming law. But the credit industry, of course, had not given up, and Bush had moved to the White House. They now had Republican-controlled Senate, House, and White House. And Mrs. Clinton was now Senator Clinton. And the bankruptcy bill came up again, and this time Senator Clinton voted in favor of it. It was the same basic bill as the one her husband had vetoed. But now, as Senator Clinton,
From New York,
where there are strong banking interests, and who was very concerned about raising money, and very concerned about what she saw as her business constituency, she took a different position on the bankruptcy bill. And my own view of that was less about anger and more about despair, because if Hillary Clinton couldn't resist the pull, the demands of a well-financed lobbying group like that, then who would? Would there be a single senator, a single representative left to be there to do the people's business? Now, I should say, when the bill ultimately passed in 2005, she was not in the Senate that day, but she issued a very strong press release saying that she would oppose the bill and thought it was a bad idea. So perhaps as she developed a stronger position, her view on it changed. But it is a reminder of how powerful money is in Washington.
And so what then is the political answer? Is it information? Is it organizing? Is it blogging, which you're now doing on Talking Points Memo Cafe? Right. Yes.
Well, you know, partly, I'll back up a little bit for the answer. I believe now in guerrilla warfare. I'll go anywhere, I'll do anything to talk about these issues. And it's a lot more than bankruptcy. It's about the economics of the family. It's every part of it. So part of the answer, absolutely, is political. Part of it is about raising awareness. Part of it is why I sit here with you today, instead of spending this time, you know, back in Cambridge churning out one more number that nobody looks at. That's part of it. And part of it is the world is changing out there. You know, you can say, we don't have to worry about those folks who go bankrupt, technical amendments, who cares, for a while. But we reached a point in America a few years ago where more people went through bankruptcy than graduated from college in a single year. More people filed for bankruptcy than had a heart attack. More children lived in homes that were filing for bankruptcy than in homes that were filing for divorce. And what that starts to tell you is there's not anybody left in America now, middle-class America, who either hasn't gone bankrupt or doesn't have a brother or a cousin or a teacher or a sister or a dear friend who hasn't lost a job, who hasn't gotten sick, who hasn't had to go through this process. We're on target now just a step beyond bankruptcy. We're on target now to see 1.4 million families thrown out of their houses this year in mortgage foreclosure. 1 in every 7 Americans right now is dealing with a debt collector, has debts they can't pay. We can hear the word from Washington, oh, it's all about personal responsibility, over and over and over. But at some point, the families themselves start to say, no good. This answer doesn't work. Indeed, I should point out, some of the family-oriented groups that have aligned themselves politically with conservatives, they have backed off now and said on bankruptcy issues, on credit card issues, on payday loan issues, on home mortgage issues, Congress has got to go a different way. Now, have they yelled it from the rooftops? No, but the cracks are starting to appear.
Well, let's go back and talk now about this this bigger picture of where the middle class finds itself, both from your own personal experience, from what you were experiencing as a lawyer academic studying these issues. What we're witnessing beginning, I guess, in the 70s is a major economic transition in this country affecting the family, and everybody is running to catch up. Talk a little about it. Give us that big picture.
So in the second half of the 20th century, the single most important economic thing that happened is that millions of mothers poured back into the workforce. And that's the only thing that kept family income rising. Starting in about 1970, a fully employed male's wages completely flatten out. And in fact, a fully employed male today, on average, median, earns about $800 less than his dad earned a generation ago. So the family, unlike the first 70 years of the 20th century, where productivity went up and wages went up, the family, there becomes a split. Wages flatten for men, and the family does better only if they can put 2 people in the workforce. And the norm switches from a 1-earner family to a 2-earner family becomes the median for those who are lucky enough to have it. And you'd think, now if you thought, well, that's the only thing that's happened, we should be richer. We should have more savings, we should have very little debt. But expenses in the same 30-year period far outstripped what the families are spending. And I'm not talking about consumer price index. So here's the division. Families today I want to compare a mom, dad, and 2 kids today with a mom, dad, and 2 kids 30 years ago, when you started a family in 1971, as I did. What happens on spending? Start with the consumption. This is what everyone does. This, again, the popular media. Why are people in trouble? Mm-hmm. Too many Game Boys, too many iPods, too many $200 sneakers. In fact, families today, adjusted for inflation, spend less on clothing, less on food, including eating out, less on furniture, less on appliances than they spent a generation ago. Where they spend more is for a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house. The median family is spending about 80% more on mortgage payments, adjusted for inflation, than they spent a generation ago. They're spending about 75% more for health insurance than they spent a generation ago. Because today they need 2 cars instead of 1, they're spending about 60% more on cars. They're paying for child care, which of course they didn't do a generation ago.
Because the mother was home.
Because mother was home. And they are paying more for taxes because of progressive taxation. When you've got 2 incomes, that second one is being taxed at a higher rate than if they were being taxed separately. So a generation ago, let me see if I can do this as a picture. The median American family in the United States spent about half of its income on those basic fixed expenses. The mortgage, health insurance, transportation, taxes, and nothing on child care. Today, the median 2-income family is spending 75% of their income on those 5 basic expenses. And with 2 people in the workforce, they actually have fewer dollars left over than their 1-income parents had a generation ago to cover everything, to cover all the flexible things, food and clothing and savings and vacations and all the other kinds of expenses that come up. So what we have today is we have 2 people working full-time, flat out, hard bore, and they actually have less money to spend than 1 person working full-time just 1 generation ago.
And the older system had a built-in backup, and this system does not, because both are already working. Talk a little about that, because this is a very vulnerable family that we have today.
That's right.
Because of the job market, health care, illness, and so on.
So what's happened is not only has the picture changed on the family budget, but now take a look at the risk side. A generation ago, if dad got sick or got laid off, mom, and that's who it usually was, didn't just sit home and wring her hands. She went to work. And yeah, she didn't make as much money as moms make today when they go to work. She didn't have as much experience, but every dollar she made was a new dollar. A dollar that had not been built into the family budget. So between unemployment insurance and the new dollars that mom could bring in, they could survive a period of unemployment, a period of illness. They had a little extra something. A child who had extra expenses. Mom go to work, you could add a little extra on. Today's family is already full out. They've got both people in the workforce full time, and in fact, think about it for a second, it creates its own vulnerabilities. So today, a family, instead of having to have 52 paychecks to know that they'll be able to make the mortgage payment, keep the health insurance, remember that budget. They're spending 75% just to make the nut. That means they've got to bring home 104 paychecks. And that means they have double the risk someone will get laid off, double the risk that somebody will get too sick to go to work. And here's the new one that's come in. Today, if a child gets sick, or if grandma falls and breaks a hip, someone's got to take off work to be with them. A generation ago, you already had someone at home to be able to fill that other role. So it could be bad if a child got sick, but it didn't have an income effect. Mom was home, mom could take care of a sick child. Today, someone's got to take off, and for most jobs, that means they lose income. So Jacob Hacker's work in The Great Risk Shift, what Jacob shows is over this same 30-year period that I'm looking at, what's called income volatility, the odds that you will see a 20% drop in your family income, which is pretty strong if you've already committed 75% of your income
Yeah.
on these expenses, has just climbed over this same 30-year period. So people put it all together, it's like a pressure cooker. People are more likely to lose jobs than they were before.
And the jobs are going abroad.
The jobs are going abroad. When they lose jobs, just statistically, the odds that they'll get back a job that pays as well as the job they lost has gone down compared with a generation ago. They run the risk that if someone in the family gets sick, that they're going to lose income. These are families that are losing health insurance, losing retirement. So what we're really watching here is a family unit that's getting more and more economically vulnerable. They're working harder than ever. They got 2 people in the workforce. They're trying to do, you know, homework at night with the kids and hold it all together. And yet, economically, every part of the game is loaded against them.
And you point out in this book and in your writings that little pieces of this story, for example, the focus on the family, the concern about education of one's children, the need to get in the right neighborhood to get the right school, the commitment to a mortgage that puts you even more on the edge. These things sort of impact this very vulnerable situation even to a greater extent over time, and it's all about, I want my kids to have the best education.
I want my kids to have a shot at making it in the middle class. This is what it's about for parents. And so what does that mean in America today? Because of our peculiar way of financing higher education, it means you got to get to the right zip code, because the right zip code will determine the school assignment for your child. And what's happened is prices have shifted on those zip codes. So here's one. Now this one, the government doesn't have data going back quite so far, so the numbers are a little bit off, but starting in 1983, they've got data. When you compare the rise in housing costs for families with no children, households with no children, singles, anyone who doesn't have children at home, minor children, and households that have minor children, households without children from 1983 to 2005 saw a 50% increase in what it costs to buy the same, their housing, their 3-bedroom, 1-bath. Families with children saw a 100% increase in that same time period. Why? Not because they're all desperate families with children and have a bigger need for granite countertops or spa bathrooms, but because housing is the substitute way to buy your way into a decent school system. We pull out the studies in this that show that housing prices will reflect things like a 5-point difference in 3rd grade reading scores will translate into thousands of dollars of difference in the price of houses in neighborhoods that are otherwise matched for all their amenities and sidewalks and police service and everything else. And I want to be clear here. This is white families, African American families, Hispanic families, Asian families. It's across every spectrum. Families with children are tightening the belt one more notch, are working extra hours, are sending both people into the workforce to try to get into the best possible school district they can get their children into. Families are in financial trouble, not because they're irresponsible, but because they're too responsible. They're trying to do it for the kids.
Now, you know, all the literature in comparative politics writing about democracy, democratization, I think they point to the importance of the middle class as the foundation of a working democratic system. What are the long-term implications of what you're saying? I mean, obviously bankruptcy is one, but it would seem to suggest that just as in foreign policy, in domestic policy, our system is not working very well, if at all, and it has long-term consequences for what we're going to be in the future.
Absolutely. A strong middle class is what gives us a strong democracy. It's what gives us a strong economy. It's what makes us flexible and able to compete in the world. It's what makes us who we are. Here's what I fear. Here's what I think these data point toward. I think they point toward a larger upper class. I don't want to take away from that. There are more people who are doing well, and I'm not just talking about at the billionaire level. I'm talking about at the $150,000, $200,000 level. It's a bigger group. If you don't get sick, if you don't lose your job, if you don't divorce, if you don't have a death in the family, if none of the stumbles hit you, and you've got a good job and you hang on to it for 40 years, you've got a good chance to be in a new upper class that is larger. But the rest is just one big underclass. Mm-hmm. It's families that are living paycheck to paycheck, who are dealing this week with debt collectors and next week with late fees and 29% interest on the credit card, who are on a kind of treadmill that they can never get out of debt, never put anything aside in the way of savings. They have sort of better moments and worse moments. But it's no longer the differentiation between the poor and the middle. It's between the upper and everybody else, because everybody else lives on a financial cliff. And some are getting pushed off, some are just going to hang on the edge of the cliff. I fear we are moving toward a two-tier society, and that government policies have pushed us in that direction, have encouraged that division, have made it more comfortable for those in that larger group of well-to-do, and much more dangerous for those who are the big underclass in America.
If one were to address this as a political problem, I hear in our conversation two elements that strike me as rather important if one is going to change the political configuration. One we've talked about, which is the religion, which is articulating a set of ideas about virtue and goodness and so on, which don't address the problem at all, and as you have pointed out. But then the other is America's role in the global economy, where in fact what we're doing is spending ourselves into debt, and that to make it appear that we are doing economically better than we have, we're essentially giving people as much money as they want, you know, at adjustable rate mortgages, which we will now discover may create problems. But in fact, the Japanese and the Chinese are willing to finance this so long as we continue to buy their products. So these are two very powerful configurations, political configurations, what we're doing internationally and the way we're presenting a narrative at home that strike me as quite formidable, and that only collapse will change things.
You know, and I want to add to it. I'll tell you both my hope and my fear as I draw these together. I put my nickel on education if Americans are going to remain competitive. That's our only shot. We can't afford to waste a single young person in America. We need to get as many of them as well educated as we can, and that means on through college. And that has become the new secular religion. Twice as many people believe that the moonshot landing was faked than believe you can make it in America without a college diploma. So we have this huge appetite for that's the final thrust to get my children a chance to be in the middle class, college. And yet what's happening with college? We don't pay for it collectively. We make families pay for it individually, and we make the students load up on debt so that the next generation's huge division here is that the children of well-to-do families who can afford to pay for the college education for their children, they have a leg up. They start their adult lives, if nothing else, at least at dead flat broke, right? At least at even. The children of that huge underclass start with tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And for some it'll be a good investment, and for some it will be the rock that will sink them. They start the great American race 50 yards behind the starting line, much less the finish line. They've got all this debt that they've got to manage and all this debt they've got to pay off. And we've written the laws to make it that these debts are non-dischargeable. You can't get out of these debts. If you get sick, you still have to pay these debts. If you don't have a job, you still have to pay these debts. They're really tough. And so we put this in a global context. We need an educated America to help us compete around the world, to make good jobs, to make there be a reason to have good jobs here in America. And what I fear is that we not only have mortgaged our homes, have mortgaged our incomes going forward between the subprime mortgages and the credit card debt and the payday loans, but that the way we're financing college educations right now, we are mortgaging our very future in this world. And that the America that I knew, that I grew up in, will be something that will be confined to the history books, but it won't be there for my grandchildren.
One last question. We have not much time left, so a brief answer. What can people do about all of this? The audience out there watching, should they become part of consumer groups? Should they get involved in campaigns? What do you advise them to help change it?
Yes, that's part of it. Part of it is they need to do it. It's the, think globally and act locally. Partly they need to do it with their own spending. I ended up writing a book we didn't talk about today, and that's fine, but that I never thought I would write, All You're Worth, that talks directly to families about how to budget, how to get out of debt, how to get out from underneath this giant credit machine that wants to eat families alive. So it's partly about politics. If you don't email your congresswoman or congressman and your senator, then you are part of the problem today, in my view. You've got to tell them this is an issue that matters to you. This really, truly matters. We may finally do something about global warming because enough people said, this one matters to me. The same thing has got to be true about the economics of the middle class, about debt, about credit card companies and mortgage lenders who are writing all the rules and running the show. So, yes, you've got to let people in government know that this matters to you. And you've got to do what you can to stay away from these vultures.
Professor Warren, on that note, I want to show your book one more time. One of your books for the general public, The Two-Income Trap, and the other one is called, I forgot, what is your other one called? It's
All
called
You're Worth.
All You're Worth, which is a manual for managing your own finances in this kind. But thank you very much for being on our program and for doing all this good work.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for joining us for this conversation with history.